Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
It's good to be here.
Today, we are staring down just a massive collection of ancient texts. We're talking Job, the Psalms, the Gospels.
Yeah.
Honestly, it is a heavy stack. And what's so fascinating to me is that they all seem to be wrestling with the exact same tension.
The tension between human anxiety and, well, cosmic order.
Exactly. It's this clash between the world we see, which frankly looks like absolute chaos,
Right.
where bad people win and suffering just feels totally random, and the world these texts claim exists, a world of, divine architecture, one that actually makes sense.
And the core premise, really, across all these sources, is that what we perceive as chaos is actually a firm foundation. But to see it, the texts argue you have to shift your perspective from the immediate, what's right in front of your face, to the eternal.
It's that clash between the seen world of temporary struggle and the unseen world of this divine structure. So our mission for this deep dive is to analyze how these texts build this concept of God in opposition to a random, chaotic universe, and what that actually means for how a person lives their life.
Well, it really starts with the definition of scale.
Yeah.
Because if you want to argue against that materialist worldview, that everything is just random, you first have to establish a different kind of observer.
Okay, let's get into that, because the first place these texts go is to the absolute limits of human knowledge. We've got Job 38, Psalm 24. And they don't exactly start with a gentle introduction.
No, not at all. Job 38 is essentially an interrogation. In the story, you have Job who's questioning the fairness of his suffering. He wants answers, and the response he gets isn't a legal defense or an apology. It's a physics lesson.
It is intense. The text says the Lord speaks out of the storm and opens with, "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge?" I mean, that is a rough way to start a conversation.
It sets the tone immediately. And then the questions begin. And this is where the text tries to establish this God concept as an architect of a complexity that's just, well, totally beyond our grasp. It asks, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand.
The imagery is just wild. I mean, it asks if you can bind the chains of the Pleiades or loosen Orion's belt. It talks about the storehouses of the snow.
A path for the thunderstorm.
It feels like it's trying to just overwhelm you with data.
That's exactly what it's doing. And it's the specificity that stands out. Storehouses of snow. It's arguing the universe has this mechanical complexity, the way constellations are bound, how weather systems work, that humans are simply not qualified to manage.
So it's like the text is saying, unless you understand the instincts of a lioness, you're not qualified to judge the fairness of your own life.
Precisely. It challenges the skeptic by pointing out the limits of their data set. The argument is, you don't have enough information to call this chaos. You just can't see the pattern because the pattern is galactic. It's like an ant on a microchip calling it a random landscape.
The ant sees hills and valleys. The engineer sees a processor.
Exactly. So it establishes this God character not just as a moral judge, but as an engineer of reality itself. It makes you feel very small very quickly.
And that's the point, I guess, to strip away that arrogance that we think we understand how it all works.
Right.
Before we go deeper into this analysis, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button.
So once the text establishes that humans are microscopic and the architecture is vast, it then has to address the elephant in the room.
The problem of evil, or what you might call the atheist observation.
Right. This is the strongest argument against the God of these texts, isn't it? If there's a designer and he's so powerful, why is the design so cruel? Why do wicked people prosper?
It's the classic question. And the sources we have, Psalm 37, James chapter 5, they don't dodge it. They actually lean right into it. They admit it's true.
They do. Psalm 37 observes a wicked and ruthless man flourishing like a luxuriant native tree. It's saying, look, we see it. The bad guys are winning. They're plotting against the righteous, and they're succeeding.
And James 5 is even more direct. It speaks to the rich who have hoarded wealth while their workers are crying out. It paints this picture of total injustice. It does not sugarcoat the reality that, often good people finish last.
But here's where it gets interesting. The text admits the observation is true. The wicked do prosper, but it argues the time frame of the observation is just too short.
So it's a timing issue.
It's entirely about the time scale. Psalm 37 uses this botanical analogy. It compares the wicked to green plants or grass. They look healthy right now, but the text says they will soon wither.
So the argument is their success is temporary. It has an expiration date.
Exactly. And James 5 uses an even more terrifying metaphor. It says to the wealthy oppressors, "You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter."
Ooh, that's a heavy image.
It completely reframes the envy. Usually you look at a corrupt, wealthy person and think, they have it all. But this metaphor shifts the perspective. Now it's a farmer looking at livestock. If an animal is getting extra food, getting fat, that's not a blessing. It means the end is near.
So their success is actually their downfall. The text argues that envying them is irrational because you're envying a fleeting shadow.
It's a mechanism for coping. The God concept here is the guarantor of ultimate justice, even if immediate justice is, completely absent.
It demands patience.
Which leads to the next logical step. If we're small and justice is on a delay, what does that say about our own ability to control our lives? Because the materialist view says we have to control our lives, no one else is going to do it for us.
And that's the friction point. This is where the text, Proverbs 16, Ecclesiastes 11, start to really attack the human ego. Because we all love our 5-year plan.
We do, but the text says that's an illusion.
I love Proverbs 16 for this. To humans belong the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the proper answer of the tongue.
It creates a split. We have plans, but God has the steps. The text even mentions the lot cast into the lap, basically rolling dice.
Yeah.
It says even that random result is determined by the Lord.
That is the ultimate anti-control statement.
Yeah.
It says randomness isn't random. And then you have Ecclesiastes 11, which sounds like modern investment advice, but with a spiritual twist.
Invest in 7 ventures, yes, and 8, because you do not know what disaster may come. It compares understanding God's work to understanding how a body forms in a mother's womb. It says it's impossible for us to know the mechanism.
So diversification isn't a strategy of power. It's a strategy of admitting ignorance.
Exactly. You diversify because you don't know the future. And James 4 takes a direct shot at people who think they do. It mocks those who say, today or tomorrow we will go to the city and make money.
It calls life a mist, right? A vapor.
A vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes. The analysis here is that human autonomy is an illusion. We don't even control our own breathing, let alone our financial future.
It sounds kind of depressing, though, doesn't it? To be told you have no control.
Well, it depends on how you look at it.
Huh.
If you believe you need control to be safe, then yes, it's terrifying. But if you accept the Job 38 premise, that there's an architect managing the complexity, it's actually a release. You can resign from being the CEO of the universe.
Okay, so if we accept this worldview, we're small, justice is delayed, we're not in control. How are we supposed to behave? I mean, why not just become a nihilist?
And that is the pivot to the kingdom ethics. This is where the texts, Matthew 5, Romans 13, they flip societal values completely upside down. It doesn't lead to nihilism, it leads to a radical counterculture.
The Beatitudes in Matthew 5 are the classic example.
Right. In a normal world, the strong and the aggressive win. We reward the go-getters. But the text says, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek, blessed are the persecuted.
It completely inverts the hierarchy. It says the people at the bottom are actually at the top, and the standards it sets. I mean, they're impossible.
They are radical. The text says it's not enough to avoid murder. You can't even be angry. Not enough to avoid adultery. You can't even look with lust.
If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. It's dismantling the instinct for self-preservation.
And think about that extra mile command. That refers to Roman soldiers who could legally force a civilian to carry their gear for 1 mile. It was an oppressive law. The text says, don't just submit, overwhelm the oppressor with generosity.
It turns a helpless situation into a choice of service. But then you have Romans 13, which adds this political dimension that's pretty tough to swallow for a lot of people.
It claims all authority is established by God. It demands submission to earthly rulers, even the ones persecuting you, because to rebel against authority is to rebel against the design.
So there's this paradox. You have to submit to earthly rulers, but at the same time, you're a citizen of a different higher kingdom.
It creates a dual existence. You live in the system, but you operate by a completely different set of rules.
But let's be real for a second. If the standard is be perfect and don't even get angry, how does anyone survive that? It sounds like a setup for absolute failure.
And that raises the most critical point. If you stop at the rules, you will break. So the texts pivot from rules to relationship. We see this in Galatians 5, 1 Corinthians 13, John 15.
Because if it's just a list of rules, everyone loses.
Exactly. The text moves away from what it calls the yoke of slavery, strict legalism, to faith expressing itself through love.
I found the metaphor in John 15 really helpful here. The vine and the branches.
It's the crucial image. The text argues no branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine.
So the fruit, the love, patience, that impossible behavior, it isn't something you produce through sheer willpower.
No. Think about a branch on a tree. The branch doesn't strain to produce an apple. The apple is a byproduct of its connection to the trunk. The text argues the behavior is a byproduct of the connection. If you're connected to the God concept, the vine, the fruit just happens. If you're disconnected, you can do nothing.
It shifts everything from earning to receiving.
And then 1 Corinthians 13 says that without this connection, without love, everything else is just useless.
A clanging cymbal.
Right. You can have prophecy, knowledge, faith that moves mountains, but the text says without love, the calculation is zero. I am nothing. It's a binary system. Connection or just noise.
So God isn't just the rule giver. He's the source of the fuel required to follow the rules.
Precisely. It's a closed loop. The demand is impossible, but the supply is provided.
Okay, but we still have to deal with the reality of pain. What about when things go really wrong? Death, despair. How does the text handle that? Because an atheist could argue suffering proves the universe is broken and indifferent.
This brings us to the final piece. Reframing pain itself. This is 2 Corinthians 4, Romans 8.
And the description of life in 2 Corinthians is not glamorous at all.
No. It describes being hard-pressed on every side but not crushed, struck down but not destroyed.
And he uses this image of jars of clay.
It's a contrast, a cheap, fragile clay jar holding a treasure. The argument is that human fragility is a design feature, not a bug. It exists to show that the all-surpassing power comes from God, not from us.
So our weakness is the point.
Our breaking point is where the evidence of the divine begins, and then you get the scale again. He calls his suffering light and momentary troubles.
Which is an audacious thing to say when you're being beaten and starved.
Incredibly bold, but he weighs it against an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Imagine a balance scale. On one side, a lifetime of suffering. On the other, eternity. The text argues the suffering just flies up into the air. It's weightless by comparison.
It demands a fixation on the unseen.
That's the ultimate counterargument to a purely materialist worldview, the text says. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal.
And that extends to death itself. The trumpet call, the dead rising.
Yeah.
It refuses to grieve like those who have no hope.
It asserts that physical reality isn't the final reality. The graveyard is seen, but the resurrection is unseen. And the text claims the unseen architecture is more real.
So let's bring this all together. We've gone on quite a journey here.
We have.
We started with the microscopic insignificance of man and Job God as the architect, the temporary nature of wickedness in the Psalms, the grass that withers.
We moved to the futility of human planning in Proverbs, and then the impossible ethical standards of the Gospels, which can only be met by staying connected to the vine.
And finally, that reliance on the unseen in Corinthians, the refusal to let pain be the final word. It presents a cohesive, though, very difficult worldview.
It does. It presents a world where losing in the short term, turning the other cheek, suffering, injustice, is framed as the only way to win in the long term.
It completely redefines winning.
Yes. It argues that the person who clings to control loses it, but the person who surrenders control to the architect finds a firm foundation.
It's a lot to process. The texts claim that fools say in their hearts there is no God, but they also imply that believing in this God requires you to abandon your own logic and your own timeline.
A total surrender of the ego.
So here's a question for you to take with you. The text suggests that our need to control our own future is an illusion anyway. If you really truly stripped away that need to control, would you feel more anxiety or less?
That is the question.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.